The cafe hummed softly around us, but for me, the world narrowed to Liam. His steady gaze held mine, his knee pressing gently against mine beneath the table. Every small touch, every glance that lingered too long, felt like a whispered promise, daring me to acknowledge something I hadn't even allowed myself to name. He didn't pull away, and neither did I. The unspoken tension between us simmered, warm and electrifying, like standing at the edge of a cliff, breathless and ready to fall. "So," he began, his voice quieter now, his fingers tracing lazy circles on the rim of his coffee cup, "do you ever think about the old days? Back when you and Daniel were inseparable?" I laughed, soft but uneasy, trying to ground myself under the weight of his gaze. "More often than I should admit. Those were some of the best years of my life." His lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. "I remember you always being over at the house. You were more than just Daniel's friend. You were family." A warmth bloomed in my chest, soft and steady. "You all made me feel that way." He nodded, leaning closer. His voice was so low I almost didn't hear him. "Maybe that's because you were." I glanced away, my mind reeling from the way his words settled over me, wrapping me in something tender and unexpected. When I dared to meet his eyes again, they hadn't wavered. There was an openness in them, a quiet vulnerability that unraveled me in ways I hadn't thought possible. After a pause, he reached out, his hand brushing against mine. It was such a small touch, something no one else would have noticed, but it sent a jolt through me, like the world had tilted on its axis. His fingers were warm and deliberate, lingering just enough to let me know this wasn't an accident. I didn't pull away. Instead, I let my hand shift closer, our fingers tangling together. The sensation was intoxicating, like breaking a rule I didn't know I'd been living by. "I'm glad you're here," he murmured, so softly it was almost lost in the cafe's gentle hum. "Me too," I replied, my voice unsteady as my heart thundered in my chest. The moment was fragile, stretched like glass, ready to shatter. And then Daniel's voice broke through, pulling us back into the world we'd ignored. His easy smile and casual energy swept away the intimacy, leaving us scrambling to retreat. Our hands untangled, and the spell broke, but the warmth of his touch lingered, echoing like a secret only we shared. The afternoon unfolded with laughter and catching up, Daniel blissfully unaware of the tension that hung between Liam and me. Yet, every time our eyes met, the air seemed to crackle. My thoughts drifted, circling back to him again and again. When Daniel invited me to their apartment for drinks that evening, I hesitated. The weight of everything left unspoken between Liam and me made my chest tight. But when I looked at him, his faint smile and steady gaze filled me with a pull I couldn't ignore. I said yes, curiosity and something deeper guiding me forward. The air in their apartment was warm, filled with the sound of Daniel's laughter and the occasional clink of glasses. But I wasn't fully present. My attention kept drifting to Liam, to the subtle glances we exchanged when Daniel wasn't looking, to the way his presence felt like a quiet hum beneath everything else. As the evening wore on, Daniel left the room to take a call, leaving me alone with Liam. The silence between us stretched, heavy with everything we hadn't said, everything we hadn't dared to do. Liam leaned back into the couch, his arm resting casually along the top, but his eyes were anything but relaxed. They burned with an intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. "I was hoping we'd get a moment alone," he murmured, his voice soft but charged. I swallowed, my pulse quickening. "Yeah." He nodded, his gaze never leaving mine. "There's something I've wanted to tell you. For a while now." His hand moved, settling lightly on my knee. The contact sent warmth rushing through me, my heart pounding so loudly I thought he might hear it. His fingers brushed slow, deliberate circles along my knee, and I couldn't look away. "What is it?" I whispered, the words catching in my throat. He hesitated, his gaze flickering over my face as though searching for something. "Back in the day," he began, his voice quieter now, "when you used to come over all the time, I noticed you, more than I should have. You and Daniel would hang out, and I'd be in the background pretending not to. But I couldn't help it. His confession hit me like a tidal wave, overwhelming and impossible to process all at once. Heat rushed to my cheeks as the weight of his words settled in. You noticed me? I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. More than noticed, he admitted, his hand tightening slightly on my knee. I wanted you to notice me too. I just didn't think you ever did. I felt a flush of emotions, surprise, disbelief, and something dangerously close to exhilaration. I'd buried my feelings for Liam for so long, convinced they were one-sided, a foolish crush I could never act on. Yet here he was, admitting he'd felt the same all along. Before I could respond, his hand slid higher, brushing along my thigh, slow and deliberate. A thrill shot through me, the closeness of him overwhelming. My hand found his shoulder, steadying myself, and before I could second-guess it, I leaned in. Our lips met in a soft, tentative kiss. It was like nothing I'd ever experienced, gentle at first, exploring, then deepening with a fervor that left me breathless. His hand moved to the back of my neck, pulling me closer as his fingers tangled in my hair. My heart raced, my mind a whirl of sensations, the warmth of his breath, the steady press of his lips, the way his touch felt so certain, so right. When we finally pulled apart, the world seemed to shift. His gaze held mine, filled with hope, desire, and something deeper I couldn't yet name. Liam, I began, my voice trembling. The weight of everything I wanted to say caught in my throat. Before I could finish, Daniel's footsteps echoed down the hallway. The spell broke, and we scrambled apart, faces flushed, hearts pounding. When Daniel re-entered the room, his easy smile didn't waver, blissfully unaware of what had just transpired. The rest of the night passed in a blur. We laughed, shared stories, and drank, but I was only half there. My thoughts kept circling back to Liam, to the heat of his touch, the taste of his kiss, the unspoken connection between us that felt like it had always been there, waiting to be discovered. When I finally left, the cool night air did nothing to calm my racing thoughts. Driving home, I replayed everything, his words, his touch, his confession. My chest ached with something I couldn't quite define, a longing that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. The days that followed were restless. I couldn't stop thinking about him. I wanted to see him again, to relive that stolen moment, but fear kept me from reaching out. The lines we'd crossed weren't just mine. They were Daniel's too, and the thought of what this could do to him paralyzed me. Just as I was about to give up, my phone lit up with a message. It was from Liam. Can we talk? I need to see you. My breath caught. My fingers hovered over the screen for a moment before I typed back, yeah, let's meet. We agreed to meet at a nearby park, somewhere quiet, away from prying eyes and familiar faces. When I arrived, he was already there, leaning against a tree with his hands in his pockets, his gaze fixed on the ground. He looked up as I approached, and the intensity in his eyes stole my breath. We stood there for a moment, neither of us speaking, the silence heavy with everything we'd been holding back. Finally, he stepped closer, his hand reaching for mine. I haven't been able to stop thinking about you, he said, his voice low, almost trembling. I don't know where this is going, but I know it's real. His words sent a wave of warmth through me, and I found myself gripping his hand tighter. I feel it too, I admitted, my voice barely audible. But it's complicated, Daniel, everything. I know, he said, his thumb tracing soft circles on the back of my hand. But I can't ignore this. I don't want to. The sincerity in his voice melted away my last defenses. The fear, the doubt, it was still there, but it felt smaller now. Less important than the quiet connection that pulsed between us. We have to be careful, I said, stepping closer. If we're going to do this, it has to be real. We can't hurt anyone. It is real, he murmured, his free hand lifting to cup my face. And I want this, us, to be more than just a moment. Before I could respond, his lips found mine again. This kiss was slower, deeper, filled with unspoken promises and the weight of all that had brought us here. The world around us faded, leaving only the warmth of his touch and the steady rhythm of his heart beneath my hand. When we finally parted, breathless, I looked into his eyes and saw the same quiet determination I felt. Whatever lay ahead, we would face it together. The days that followed were a mix of stolen moments and quiet confessions. Liam and I saw each other whenever we could, careful to keep our growing connection hidden from Daniel and everyone else. Each meeting felt like balancing on the edge of something fragile and precious, the secrecy heightening every touch, every glance. One evening, as we lay together in the warm stillness of my apartment, I looked over at Liam. His hand was entwined with mine, his thumb tracing idle patterns on my palm. The glow of the streetlights spilled through the curtains, painting soft shadows across his face. "Do you ever think about what happens next?" I asked, my voice low, unsure. His gaze shifted to mine, soft but unwavering. "Every day," he said, his fingers tightening around mine. "And I know one thing for sure, I don't want to lose this. I don't want to lose you." His words filled me with a sense of reassurance, but they also brought the weight of our situation crashing down on me. The connection we shared was undeniable, but it existed in a fragile bubble. We couldn't stay hidden forever. "I don't either," I whispered. "But Daniel, he'll never see this coming. I don't want to hurt him." Liam nodded, his brow furrowed. "Neither. But hiding isn't a solution. This is going to mean something. If we're going to build something real, we can't keep it a secret. He deserves to know." The thought of telling Daniel made my stomach twist. He'd been my best friend for years, more like family than just a friend. The idea of betraying his trust, of potentially breaking something that had always felt unshakable, was almost too much to bear. But Liam was right. A few days later, we invited Daniel over for dinner. Liam and I spent the hours leading up to it in tense silence, the weight of what we were about to do pressing down on both of us. We cooked, set the table, and tried to act normal, but the nervous energy in the air was impossible to ignore. When Daniel arrived, he was his usual self, easygoing, full of stories, completely unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. Dinner was warm and familiar, filled with laughter and old memories. But beneath the surface, I could feel the tension radiating from Liam and me. After we cleared the table, the moment we'd been dreading arrived. Daniel leaned back on the couch, a drink in hand, his smile soft and content. Liam glanced at me, his expression filled with quiet determination. "Daniel," he began, his voice steady but tense, "there's something we need to tell you." Daniel looked between us, his brow furrowing slightly. "What's going on?" he asked, his tone shifting to something more cautious. Liam took a deep breath, his hand brushing against mine for reassurance. "This isn't easy to say, but it's important. Over the past few months we've gotten closer. Closer than just friends." A beat of silence hung in the air, heavy and unrelenting. Daniel's expression shifted from confusion to shock, his gaze landing on our hands, which were now joined on the couch between us. "You're telling me," he started, his voice trailing off as he tried to piece it together. "You two? Together?" I nodded, my throat tight. "Yes. It wasn't planned, and we didn't take it lightly. But it's real, Daniel. Means something to both of us." Daniel leaned back, setting his drink down on the table with a slight clink. His expression was a storm of emotions: hurt, confusion, maybe even betrayal. I don't know what to say," he murmured, his voice distant. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "We wanted to be sure," Liam said quietly. "We didn't want to risk telling you unless we knew this was something we couldn't ignore. And now we know." The room felt suffocating in its silence, the tension thick and unrelenting. I could see the pain etched across Daniel's face, and it tore at me. He looked at me, his eyes searching mine. "You've been my best friend for years. And you, Liam, you're my brother. How am I supposed to feel about this?" "I don't have a perfect answer for that," I admitted, my voice shaking. We just didn't want to lie to you anymore. We care about you too much to keep this from you. Daniel nodded slowly, his gaze dropping to the floor. I need time, he said after a long pause, his voice heavy. This changes everything, but I don't want to lose either of you. Just give me time to process it. Relief and sadness washed over me in equal measure. Take all the time you need, I said softly. He stood, his movements slow and measured, and walked toward the door. He paused before leaving, turning back to give us a strained smile. I hope you know what you're doing, he said, his voice tinged with something I couldn't quite place. Then he was gone. Liam let out a shaky breath beside me, his hand finding mine again. That was harder than I thought it would be, he admitted, his voice quiet. I nodded, the weight of the evening settling over me. But we did it. No more secrets. He turned to me, his expression softening as a small, tentative smile tugged at his lips. Thank you for standing by me, for being willing to risk this. I reached out, cupping his cheek in my hand. There's no one else I'd rather face this with. In that moment, as we sat together in the quiet aftermath, I felt the gravity of what we'd done. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but we had taken the first step. Together. The days after Daniel left were quiet but heavy. I kept replaying his words, the look in his eyes as he tried to process everything. Liam and I gave him space, but the uncertainty of how he'd respond weighed on us both. Still, there was relief in having the truth out, in knowing we weren't hiding anymore. Liam was a steady presence through it all. On the nights when my doubts crept in, he was there, his hand finding mine, his voice a quiet reassurance. We'll figure it out, he'd say, and somehow I believed him. 2 weeks passed before Daniel reached out. He texted me first, a simple message that felt heavier than it appeared. Can we talk? I met him at a familiar spot, a quiet park we used to hang out at as teenagers. He was already there when I arrived, sitting on a bench, his gaze distant. Hey, I said softly, sitting beside him. Hey, he replied, his tone neutral but not unkind. For a moment we sat in silence, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows around us. Finally, Daniel spoke. This hasn't been easy for me, he admitted, his voice careful. You're my best friend, and Liam's my brother. It felt like I was the last to know something that should have been obvious. But it wasn't. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. We didn't mean to hurt you. We just didn't know how to tell you. I know, he said, his tone softening. And I've been thinking a lot. About you. About Liam. About how this changes things. He paused, exhaling deeply. At the end of the day, you're still my best friend. And Liam's still my brother. I don't want to lose that. I don't want to lose either of you. Relief flooded through me, and I felt my shoulders relax for the first time in weeks. Thank you, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He offered me a small, tentative smile. Just don't make me walk in on you two or something, okay? I laughed, the tension breaking between us. Deal. After that, things didn't magically go back to normal, but they started to heal. Daniel needed time, and we gave it to him. Slowly, he warmed to the idea of Liam and me, even cracking jokes here and there. As for Liam and me, we began to find our rhythm. Without the secrecy weighing us down, our connection deepened. It was in the quiet moments that I felt it most, the way his hand would slip into mine as we walked, the way he'd look at me like I was the only thing that mattered. One evening, as we sat together in my apartment, Liam turned to me, his expression serious but soft. I'm all in, he said, his voice steady. I know this won't always be easy, but I don't care. I want us to have a real shot at this. My heart swelled at his words. I'm all in too, I replied, leaning in to kiss him. In that moment, I knew we had something worth fighting for, something real. It wouldn't always be simple, and the road ahead might be bumpy, but with Liam by my side, I felt ready for whatever came next. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to my channel for more stories that explore love, connection, and the complexities of relationship. Let's keep the conversation going.